The Germans had a rule: shoot a medic, and the world would call you a war criminal. But someone in that French farmhouse didn't care about rules. Eli Rosen had saved 11 men that week. He died trying to save number 12. The shot didn't come from the front line. It came from an upper window, and it wasn't aimed at a soldier, it was aimed at a Red Cross. Within an hour, 3 medics were dead. The sniper wasn't just killing. He was sending a message: help the wounded and you die next. The soldiers couldn't advance. They couldn't retreat. Artillery would kill civilians hiding in the cellar. Every rescue attempt became a death sentence. The sniper was using wounded men as bait, and he was patient enough to wait all day. The only man who could stop him wasn't even there yet. But when he arrived, he brought a plan so dangerous that his own men thought he'd lost his mind. This is what General Patton did when German snipers started shooting medics. The Germans had a rule: shoot a medic, and the world would call you a war criminal. But someone in that French farmhouse didn't care about rules. Eli Rosen had saved 11 men that week. He died trying to save number 12. October 18, 1944. Fog hung over a shattered orchard outside Metz, France. Wounded men cried out from the mud before sunrise. Rosen slid into a shell hole with bandages in one hand and morphine in the other. He never saw the flash from the farmhouse loft. The crack snapped across the field. He flinched, looked down at the red cross on his sleeve like he couldn't understand it, and collapsed across the man he had been trying to save. Nobody moved. Sergeant Nolan Price lifted his head, saw Rosen's helmet in the mud, and felt his stomach turn cold. "Sniper!" someone whispered. Then another medic ran forward. "Don't!" Price shouted. The second shot hit Corporal Ben Avery in the neck. He dropped so fast it looked as if the earth had pulled him under. Now the men were not just afraid. They were confused. A sniper was waiting for medics. He wasn't shooting at soldiers, he was shooting at the people trying to save them. Private Luis Ortega stared into the fog, his rifle useless in his hands. "What do we do now?" No one answered. 50 yards ahead, a wounded radio operator named Cliff Hanley was still alive. He dragged one leg through the mud, reaching toward the 2 men who had died trying to reach him. Lieutenant Warren Kell ordered smoke. Grenades popped. White clouds rolled across the orchard. For one breath, it looked possible. Then a third shot cut through the smoke and struck a stretcher-bearer in the helmet, spinning him into the roots of an apple tree. The trench line went silent. Kell crouched beside Price. "Can you see him?" "No, sir, but he sees us." Hanley cried out once. Then again, weaker. Price swallowed hard. "He's using the wounded for bait." That sentence moved through the trench like poison. Using the wounded for bait. Even then, it sounded filthy. This wasn't combat anymore. This was something darker. The sniper wasn't just killing. He was breaking something more important than bodies. He was breaking the trust that held soldiers together. The unspoken promise that if you fell, someone would come for you. That promise was dead now, lying in the mud beside Rosen and Avery. Price looked at Hanley. The radio operator's hand twitched once, then went still. The men watched. Nobody moved toward him. Nobody could. "Price," Kell said quietly, "how many men are we willing to lose for one?" "I don't know, sir." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." The sniper had done something worse than kill. He had made them calculate the value of a man's life. And that calculation, cold, tactical, necessary, felt like its own kind of poison. Price looked at Rosen's helmet again. The red cross was still visible, smeared with mud but unmistakable. The sniper had seen it. He had aimed at it, and he hadn't missed. Every medic who moved into that field would die. Every wounded man who cried out would be ignored. The sniper was patient enough to wait all day, and he had already proven he would not stop. He was using wounded men as bait, and the Americans had no good options left. They couldn't advance. They couldn't retreat. Artillery would kill civilians hiding in the cellar. Every rescue attempt would bring another death. The only thing they could do was wait, and watching men die in the mud while you wait is its own kind of death. Kell pulled out his map. His hands were steady, but his voice cracked when he spoke. "Wallace is coming. 20 minutes. 20 minutes too late, Ortega muttered. Kell didn't argue. He just stared at the field where Hanley's body lay motionless now, or what they hoped was just motionless and not dead. Nobody could tell. The fog was thickening, and the fog was lying to them. Price, Kell said. Get me a runner. I need to get a message to battalion. Tell them we have a situation. A situation, Price repeated. Tell them the enemy is targeting medics. Tell them we can't reach the wounded. Tell them. He stopped. There was nothing else to say. He had been about to say, tell them we need help. But they both knew the truth. There was no help coming. There was no smart tactic, no clever trick, no hidden move that would get Hanley out of that field alive. The sniper had chosen the battlefield, the rules, and the stakes. All the Americans could do now was watch and count the cost. Captain Henry Wallace reached the line 20 minutes later with mud on his coat and anger in his face. He had seen death before. Every officer had. But the reports he received on the way up had been different. They didn't say casualties. They said medics. They said targeted. They said using wounded as bait. Wallace studied the field through binoculars. The fog was lifting, but the orchard remained a death trap. He could see Hanley's body, still unmoving, and the two medics sprawled in the mud where they had fallen. Then he saw the farmhouse. Stone farmhouse, he said. Upper loft slit. About 200 yards. Can we hit it? Kell asked. Wallace hesitated. He had already seen what the others had not. A flash of movement in the lower windows. Not a sniper. Something smaller. He adjusted the lenses and felt his stomach drop. Wait, he said. There are civilians inside. Kell's face went pale. How many? Wallace kept the binoculars fixed. An old woman had stumbled out before dawn, trying to flee. He could see the doorway where she had been driven back by machine gun fire. Two girls huddled behind her. A mother, a grandmother, children. They were trapped in the cellar of the same farmhouse where the sniper was hiding. We can flatten it, Price said. Mortars, artillery. One round, that loft is gone. Wallace lowered the binoculars. He looked at Rosen and Avery in the mud. He looked at Hanley's body. Still alive, maybe, possibly, but growing colder by the minute. Then he looked back at the farmhouse. And kill everyone in the cellar. The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. Every man in that trench understood what Wallace was saying. There was no clean answer. There was no tactical solution that didn't involve murdering civilians. There was no rescue mission that didn't get more medics killed. The only thing they could do was nothing. And nothing meant watching Hanley die, watching the sniper laugh, watching their own morale crumble into dust. We can't just leave him, Feldman said. I know. Sir, if he's alive? I said no. Feldman stared at the field. His hands were shaking. He had trained for this. He had trained to save lives. Now he was being told to let a man die because saving him would cost more lives than it was worth. So we leave him there, Feldman said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Wallace didn't answer. He couldn't. He had command on his shoulders and no clean answer in sight. The manuals made war sound neat. The manuals said, save who you can, hold the line, keep moving. The manuals never told you what to do when the line was an orchard full of dying men and the enemy was hiding behind children. Sir, we have to do something. I'm thinking. People are dying while you think. Wallace turned on him. The anger in his face was still there, but behind it was something worse. Exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who had been given an impossible choice and told to make it look easy. Give me options, Wallace said. Not problems. Options. How do we get Hanley out? No one answered, because there were no options. There was only the sniper's patience and the civilian's fear and the medic's growing despair. The enemy had chosen the ground, chosen the rules, chosen the moral battlefield. And the Americans were losing. Price spoke finally. His voice was flat. We send smoke. We send a diversion. We send 6 men crawling through the mud. Maybe one reaches him. Maybe. And how many of those 6 come back? Maybe none. Wallace closed his eyes. He could feel the decision pressing on him like a physical weight. He could feel Hanley's life in his hands, and he could feel the lives of 6 more men he would be sentencing to death if he gave the order. Then he made the only decision he could. "Hold the line," he said. "Nobody moves. I'm sending reports upward. This is beyond us now." Felt like surrender. Felt like failure. It felt like leaving a man to die because the math didn't work in his favor. And Wallace knew, with sick certainty, that Hanley was already dead. He just hadn't stopped breathing yet. Wallace sent reports upward. Sniper targeting marked medics. Repeated casualties. Civilians near target. The words were clinical, stripped of emotion. Exactly what command expected. He didn't write what he really felt, that the enemy had found a way to break something more important than bodies. He didn't write that his men were starting to look at the wounded differently, calculating whether a man was worth the cost of reaching him. He didn't write that he felt like a failure. By noon, they knew enough. The sniper fired only when medics moved. He ignored riflemen unless they went for casualties. He was patient, disciplined, almost calm. 2 more men were hit before anyone caught the faint blink of glass in the loft. A machine gun raked the window. Nothing. A mortar landed short. Nothing. The sniper adjusted his position inside the farmhouse, and the Americans adjusted their calculations, each one a little more desperate than the last. At the battalion aid station, Major Samuel Duvall listened to Feldman describe Rosen's death. Feldman's hands were still shaking. His voice cracked when he said Rosen's name. "He had the Red Cross clear as day," Feldman said. "You could see it from 100 yards. The sniper saw it. He aimed at it." Duvall removed his gloves slowly. He had been a doctor before the war. He had delivered babies, treated influenza, held dying children in his arms. He had never seen anything like this. "You're certain, Major?" "I watched him die." Duvall didn't ask for more details. He didn't need them. He had seen the bodies coming in, Rosen first, then Avery, then 2 more from subsequent rescue attempts. Each one had a single round in the chest or head. Each one had been shot while wearing a Red Cross. Each one had been shot while trying to save someone else. "I'll send word to 3rd Army," Duvall said. "You think they'll care?" Duvall looked at Feldman. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to say that command would understand, that they would send reinforcements, that they would fix this somehow. But he had been in the army long enough to know the truth. "I'll send word," he repeated. "That's all I can do." By late afternoon, the story had spread through the battalion. Men who had buried friends were suddenly speaking softly. The sniper had become more than an enemy. He had become something else. Something that made soldiers uncomfortable. Something that made them question what they were fighting for and why. They called him the medic killer in whispers. They said he was SS. They said he was a psychopath. They said he had been ordered to do it. The rumors changed with every telling, but the fear remained constant. Fear and something darker, a growing sense that the rules had changed, that the war had become something uglier than any of them had signed up for. Then the message reached 3rd Army headquarters. Nobody expected General Patton to come. Generals didn't visit the front lines for one sniper. They sent orders. They sent reinforcements. They didn't show up in the mud with their boots on the ground. But Patton wasn't like other generals. Just before dusk, engines rolled onto the muddy road behind battalion command. Staff officers stepped aside. A jeep door opened. Patton climbed out slowly, deliberately, and looked around. His eyes moved over the stretchers, the covered bodies, the orchard where the sniper was still waiting. He didn't look angry at first. That unsettled everyone. The soldiers expected fury. They expected the legendary temper, the explosive rage, the shouting. Instead, Patton's face was calm, contemplative almost. He studied the field as if he were reading a map written in a language only he understood. Major Duvall saluted. Patton returned it. "Show me." They took him to the line as darkness gathered over the ridge. Lieutenant Kell gave the report. 3 medics dead. 2 stretcher bearers hit. 4 wounded during recovery attempts. Civilians believed in cellar. Sniper still active. Patton looked at Rosen's helmet lying in the mud. The Red Cross was smeared but visible. He paused. "Did he fire on armed men crossing alone?" Patton asked. "Only when they went for casualties, sir." "Did he fire on clearly marked medics?" "Yes, sir." Patton said nothing. The soldiers said nothing. The silence stretched like a held breath. Finally, Patton turned to Duvall. Bring me the translator and every German prisoner taken within 5 miles. Price blinked. He had expected more questions, more reconnaissance, more strategy. He hadn't expected that. Prisoners, sir? Patton looked at him once. His face still didn't show anger. But something in his eyes, something cold and absolute, made Price step back. Yes, Sergeant. Prisoners. Nobody asked why. Nobody argued. Because when General Patton told you to do something, you didn't ask questions. You just moved. And you tried not to think about what he might be planning. And if you want more World War II stories where humanity, war, and difficult decisions collided, make sure to subscribe. The sniper stood in the mud with his hands raised. His camouflage smock was wet with dew. His face was thin, pale, utterly expressionless. He looked like a man who had already accepted his death. The American rifles never wavered. Every soldier in that orchard wanted to pull the trigger. They had watched their friends die. They had heard Hanley cry out. They had felt the poison of helplessness spread through their ranks. And now the source of all that pain was standing right in front of them, defenseless. Patton walked forward slowly. His boots made soft sounds in the mud. The morning light was just beginning to break over the ridge, casting long shadows across the field. The rescued civilians huddled together near the farmhouse door, the mother clutching her daughters, the grandmother still trembling. The wounded German volunteer lay on the ground with Feldman kneeling beside him, bandaging his shoulder. Patton stopped a few feet from the sniper. He didn't speak immediately. He just studied the man in front of him. The sniper didn't meet his eyes. He stared at the mud between his boots. "Ask him why," Patton said. The sniper answered without looking up. His voice was flat, emotionless, rehearsed. He had clearly prepared for this moment. He had probably prepared for it every night in that loft, watching the Americans struggle and die, knowing that eventually someone would come for him. Weiss hesitated before translating. The words felt wrong in his mouth. He says he was ordered to stop evacuation at any cost. Patton's face didn't change. Continue. Weiss swallowed hard. He says medics kept Americans fighting. He says Weiss stopped. He looked at the sniper with something between disgust and pity. He says mercy was a luxury Germany could no longer afford. The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. The soldiers in the trench line heard the translation. Price felt his stomach turn cold again, the same cold he had felt when Rosen fell. Only this time it was different. This time it was mixed with something else, a strange, uncomfortable understanding. The sniper wasn't a monster. He was a soldier who had been told something so monstrous that he had believed it. He had been told that American medics carried ammunition. He had been told that medics weren't really medics. He had been told that mercy was weakness. And he had believed it because believing it was easier than questioning it. Patton stared at the sniper for a long time. The legendary temper never surfaced. Instead, his voice stayed level, calm, almost gentle. When he spoke, every man in that field leaned forward to hear. "Mercy is not a luxury," Patton said. "It is what separates soldiers from animals." The words landed like stones in still water. They rippled outward through the orchard, through the trench line, through every man who had been watching. Some of the soldiers nodded. Others just stared at the ground. A few, the ones who had been thinking about pulling the trigger, felt something shift inside them. The sniper finally looked up. His face still showed nothing, but there was something in his eyes, confusion maybe, or doubt, or the first flicker of understanding that he had been used. Patton turned away. He didn't look back at the sniper. He didn't need to. The confrontation was over. The sniper had given his reason, and Patton had given his response. There was nothing left to say. Sniper was led away. The prisoners who had volunteered were treated as well. The young man with the wounded shoulder had Weiss translating for him, telling him to stay still, stay calm, that the American medics would help him. He didn't understand why. He had expected to be shot. He had expected to die in that field, a willing sacrifice for a cause he barely believed in. Instead, he was being saved by the same people his own sniper had been trying to kill. Every soldier who saw it understood that Patton had not come only to punish. He had come to draw a line in the mud and make everyone look at it. The line was simple. It was brutal. It was completely, utterly human. Soldiers don't kill medics. Soldiers don't use civilians as shields. Soldiers don't abandon their humanity, even when war tries to steal it from them. And in that moment, standing in the mud with the dead and the dying all around him, Patton made sure no one would forget it. Patton stood in the mud for a long moment after the sniper was led away. The morning light was fully breaking now, casting pale gold across the shattered orchard. It should have felt like victory. The sniper was captured. The civilians were safe. The plan had worked. But victory didn't feel clean. It never did when you counted the cost. Rosen was dead. Avery was dead. Hanley was dead. 3 medics and a radio operator. Gone because one man had decided the rules didn't apply to him. The stretcher bearer who had been shot through the helmet was still alive. Barely, but he would never walk again. The wounded men who had cried out in the darkness were still there, still waiting, still bleeding into the mud. Price walked through the orchard with his rifle slung over his shoulder. He stepped carefully around the bodies. Rosen lay face down, his arms still stretched toward the man he had been trying to save. His red cross was smeared with mud and blood. Price knelt beside him and closed his eyes. It was a small gesture, meaningless really. Rosen was beyond caring. But Price did it anyway because it was the only thing he could do. Feldman was still kneeling beside the wounded German volunteer. The young prisoner's face was pale, his shoulder wrapped in bandages. He looked up at Feldman with wide, frightened eyes. He didn't understand why an American medic was helping him. He had been sent to die, a sacrifice for a cause he barely believed in. Instead, he was being saved. "Hold still," Feldman said. His voice was quiet, steady. "You're going to be fine." The volunteer didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He stopped struggling and let Feldman work. Price watched from a few feet away. He had been a soldier long enough to know that this moment was strange. Not the fighting that was normal. Not the death that was normal too. What was strange was the mercy. American medics bending over a bleeding German volunteer while Rosen lay under a poncho in the rain. That was the part that didn't fit. That was the part that made the war feel wrong in a way that killing never did. "Price!" Kell called from the trench line. "Get over here." Price stood slowly. He looked at Feldman one more time, then walked back to the trench. Kell was studying a map. His face was tired, hollowed by the last 24 hours. "We're moving out in 2 hours. Patton's orders." "Where to?" "East. Always east." Price nodded. He understood. The war didn't stop because a sniper was captured. The war didn't stop because medics died or civilians were saved or mercy was shown. The war just kept going, grinding forward, swallowing everything in its path. "Price," Kell said quietly, "what he did today, I know, sir. It was right. I don't know if it was smart, but it was right." Price looked at the farmhouse. The civilians were huddled together near the door, wrapped in blankets someone had found. The mother was crying silently. The grandmother was praying. The girls were staring at the bodies in the field with expressions too old for their faces. "Yes, sir," Price said. "It was right." Before Patton left, he stopped beside the medics. His jeep was waiting, engine running, staff officers shifting impatiently behind him. But Patton took the time to look at each medic in the eyes. "Bury our dead with honor," he said. "Treat their wounded the way ours should have been treated. Then move east." Feldman looked up from the volunteer's bandages. His hands were red with blood, both German and American, mixed together in the mud. "Yes, sir," he said. Patton climbed into his jeep and was gone. The men watched him go. Some saluted, others just stared. They had seen something today that they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Not the death that was normal. Not the fear that was normal too. What they would carry was the mercy. The choice Patton made when hatred would have been easier. The choice Feldman made when he knelt beside an enemy soldier and treated his wounds. Years later, Price would say the strangest part was not the sniper or the fear. It was American medics bending over a bleeding German volunteer while Rosen lay under a poncho. Because in places where uniforms blurred with mud and grief, humanity did not survive by accident. It survived because somebody chose it when hatred would have been easier. The medics buried Rosen at dusk. They buried Avery beside him. They found Hanley's body in the mud and buried him too. The German volunteer recovered. He was sent to a prisoner of war camp, where he told the other prisoners what had happened. He told them about the American general who could have killed everyone in that farmhouse and didn't. He told them about the medics who bandaged his wound while their own friends were still lying in the mud. Some of the prisoners didn't believe him. They said he had been brainwashed by American propaganda. But the volunteer didn't argue. He just touched his bandaged shoulder and smiled. Because he knew what had happened, even if they didn't. He had been shown mercy when he had earned none. And that was the kind of thing that changed a man forever. The sun climbed higher over the orchard. But the warmth never reached the men standing in the mud. They had buried their dead. They had treated the wounded. They had watched Patton's jeep disappear down the muddy road. And now they were alone with what had happened. Price stood at the edge of the trench, staring at the freshly dug graves. 3 crosses. 3 names. 3 men who had died trying to save someone else. He had known them, not well, but enough. Rosen had been quiet, serious, always carrying extra bandages in case someone needed them. Avery had been young, barely out of training, still writing letters home every night. Hanley had been a radio operator, the kind of man who kept his head down and did his job without complaint. Now they were gone, and the war would keep moving east without them. Feldman walked up beside him. His hands were clean now, but the red stain seemed permanent somehow. "Price," he said quietly. "Feldman, I keep thinking about the sniper, what he said, about medics carrying ammunition. It was a lie. I know, but he believed it. He really believed it." Price looked at Feldman. The medic's face was tired, hollowed by the last 24 hours. But there was something else in his eyes too, something that looked like the beginning of understanding. "Men believe what they're told," Price said, "especially in war, especially when the truth is harder to face." Feldman nodded slowly. "I want to hate him, the sniper. I want to hate him for what he did to Rosen, to Avery, to all of them. But I keep thinking, if I had been born German, if I had been raised to believe what he believed, would I have done the same thing?" Price didn't answer immediately. He had asked himself the same question 100 times since the sniper surrendered. "That's the point, isn't it?" Price finally said. "The mercy, the choice, doesn't mean anything if it's easy. It only means something when it's hard. When you have every reason to hate someone and you don't." Feldman was quiet for a long moment. The men were gathering their equipment, preparing to move east. The war was waiting. "I think I understand now," Feldman said. "What Patton meant when he said mercy separates soldiers from animals. It's not about being nice. It's about being human when being human is the hardest thing in the world." Price put a hand on Feldman's shoulder. "That's what I'm going to remember. Not the sniper, not the fear, but you, kneeling in the mud, bandaging a German soldier while Rosen lay under a poncho 20 feet away. That's what stayed with me." Feldman looked at the graves. "I wish they could have seen it. Rosen, Avery. I wish they could have seen that something good came out of all this." "They knew," Price said. "They knew what they were fighting for. That's why they went out there. That's why they died." The sun was fully up now, burning through the last of the fog. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. The war was still there, waiting, hungry for more. "So what do we do now?" Feldman asked. "We move east. We keep fighting. We keep saving who we can." Price looked at the German volunteer, still sitting against the farmhouse wall, his bandaged shoulder healing, his eyes still full of confusion at the mercy he had been shown. "And we remember what happened here, so it doesn't happen again." Feldman nodded slowly. Then he turned toward the line of medics, ready to move out. But before he walked away, he looked at Price one more time. "Price, do you think it changed him? The sniper. Do you think Patton's words made any difference?" Price thought about it for a long moment. He thought about the sniper's blank face, his flat voice, the rehearsed explanation that had clearly been waiting on his tongue for days. Then he thought about the flicker of confusion in the sniper's eyes when Patton said that mercy separates soldiers from animals. "I don't know," Price admitted. "Maybe, maybe not. But that's not really the point, is it?" "What is the point?" Price smiled faintly. "The point is that Patton said it anyway. The point is that we did it anyway. The point is that, in the middle of all that horror, someone chose to be human. And that's something worth remembering. Feldman nodded slowly. Then he walked away, joining the line of medics, ready to move east. Price stayed behind for one more moment. He looked at the graves, at the crosses, at the mud and the blood and the fog that had finally lifted. "What would you have done?" he whispered to the empty field. There was no answer. There never was. But maybe that was the point too. Maybe the question was more important than the answer. Maybe asking it was what kept you human when everything else was trying to turn you into something else. Price turned and walked toward the line of soldiers. The war was waiting, and somewhere in another farmhouse another sniper was taking aim. But for one brief moment, in a muddy orchard in France, someone had drawn a line in the mud, and every soldier who saw it knew that line meant something. It meant everything, and they would carry it with them for the rest of their lives. What would you have done in that orchard? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more World War II stories where humanity, war, and difficult decisions collide, we tell stories like this every week. Stories that will make you think, make you feel, and make you question what you would do when everything is on the line. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and join us next time as we explore another moment where history hung in the balance and ordinary people were forced to make impossible choices. See you in the next one.